Hello, everybody. This is Kenton Taylor Howard, and today I'm going to give you part one of a tutorial on some basics of the Unity 2D animation system. We're going to be using sprite-based animation today, and what I'm really going to show you today in this part of the tutorial is how to set up your animations correctly, and then there will be a part two to this tutorial that will focus more on the coding side of things. If you're following along this set of tutorials as part of the tutorial 1.5 assignment in my DIG 3480 class, you might want to keep in mind that there's a kind of sound tutorial that goes along with this that you should be completing as part of the tutorial 1.5 assignment. And I've done a little bit of setup before I've opened this 2D project just to incorporate the content from that tutorial. So if you haven't done that tutorial yet, you might want to go back, take a look at that tutorial, and complete that first so you have an idea of what I'm talking about here. What I've done in this tutorial as setup is created some folders in my assets folder using the assets create new folder option. And I have 5 folders. One's called animations, one called scenes, one called scripts, one called sounds, one called sprites. In my sounds folder, I've dragged in the sounds from the previous sound tutorial. So you might want to bring in those sound files if you haven't done that yet. The other thing that I've done is created a C# script in my scripts folder called cat controller. And in that script, I put in the content from the sound tutorial that we wrote in C#. So if you haven't done that yet, you might want to go ahead and create a C# script and just copy over the content from the sound tutorial. If you've already built your sound tutorial in a 2D project, then you can just kind of move forward from here and you should be fine. But if you haven't done that yet, you might want to take a moment, go back, watch the sound tutorial video, and add that content here before you go on. So I'm going to pause really quickly just to give you a chance to stop the video if that's something you want to do. If you're ready to continue and you've got that C# script set up and those sounds brought in, the next step will be to actually bring in the sprites that we're going to be using for this animation tutorial. These sprites come from a YouTube tutorial that I posted in our web courses page. So if you don't have these downloaded on your computer already, you might want to go to that YouTube tutorial and grab these cat sprites before you continue as well. But if you've already gotten through that tutorial or you've taken a look at it and you've downloaded these sprites in advance, you can just open up the cat and dog folder that comes along with it. Inside of that folder, you'll find a folder called PNG. If you click on that and then go into the folder called cat, you should see a bunch of little animations for a cat. We're going to select all of these, and then we're going to go to our sprites folder in Unity and drag them in. And you'll notice that I've brought them in already, so I've already got these sprites imported, and I can just kind of move forward because I've already dragged those in. The next thing we're going to do is create an animation. So what I'm going to do is inside of Unity in my sprites folder, I'm going to select the 10 sprites that I'll have idle in the name. It's like idle 1 through 10. And I'm going to drag these into my hierarchy. So when I do that, I'm going to get a folder creation window pop up that's asking me to create a new animation. And this is the basics of creating an animation in the 2D sprite-based animation system in Unity, which is pretty simple. I'm going to go ahead and go over to my animations folder to put my animation in. And I'm going to call this animation idle because I'm making an idle animation. Okay, cool. So now if I take a look at this in Unity, I've got this cat that's appeared on my screen. If I hit play really quickly, you'll notice that the cat is already moving. So there's already an animation on it. We've already created a basic animation. But we're going to create a couple other ones, like a walking and running animation. And again, in this video, we're just going to do this setup so that those animations are in the game already. Before we move forward, I am going to do 2 quick things that will help me with the sound portion of this tutorial. So I'm going to go down to add components, audio source, and add component, scripts. And I'm going to add that cat controller script that I already created. Then what I'm going to do is grab this idle animation I've already created and drag it into the music source slot. I'm going to go over to my sounds folder and drag that Little Town music into music clip 1. And, oops. I'm going to drag my other music into music clip 2. And that way, my sounds will actually play, just like they did in the previous sound tutorial. So if I hold down the W button, I'll get the first set of music, and if I hold down R, I'll get the second set of music. So now I've actually got an animation in the game, and even better, my animation will play a little bit of music when we press certain buttons. So the next thing I want to do is add a couple more animations to this idle animation, basically a walking and a running animation. So the first thing I'm going to do is go back to my sprites folder and select all the sprites with walk in the name. I think there's 10 of them. I'm going to drag those to the idle that's already in the hierarchy. So I'm just dragging them on top of it. And what I'm doing is creating another animation using the same game object. So I don't want these to be two separate game objects. I want them to be on the same one. I'm going to call this one walk. And as you would probably expect, I'm going to do the same thing with the running animations. I think there are 8 running animations. So let's go ahead and grab those. And cool, I've got my walking and my running animations both on my cat. Now, one thing I want to do is a little bit of setup inside of my animator to actually get these working properly so that later on when I write the code will actually sync up with the animations and they'll play when I want them to play. So if you don't have this already created, you can actually go up to the window area up at the top and scroll down to animation and highlight the animator, and that will give you this animation window. I've already got it created for me, obviously. And you can see that I've got idle, walk, and run already in here. These are the 3 animations that I've already created. You'll notice that it also, this little line from entry to idle indicates that that's the default animation. And so what that means is that idle is the animation it's going to play by default. That's going to be the first thing that it starts on. But I obviously want these walk and run animations to work too. And the way that that works is I use something called a transition. And transitions are basically something that tells Unity, I want to move from one animation to the next animation. What I'm going to set up here is called an animation loop, and that means I'm just going to set up a series of transitions that moves me from idle to walk, walk to run, run to idle, and that way I can move from any of those animations into any of the other animations. Well, I can do that by right-clicking on idle and clicking Make Transition. It's going to give me a little arrow that I can connect up to run. Then I'm going to right-click on run, click Make Transition again. Gives me another little arrow that I can connect back to idle. I'm going to do the same thing between walk and run. And the same thing between run and idle. So I've essentially made 6 transitions at the moment. And those transitions are going to allow me to move between these 3 states relatively smoothly. The next thing I'm going to do is create something called a parameter that will allow me to call these animations in my code and control which one I'm showing at any given time. So over here in this little window that says parameters, there's a tiny plus button up here at the top. I'm going to click on that, and it's going to give me a couple options: float, int, bool, trigger. I'm going to use int, so I'm creating an integer animation state, basically. I'm going to call it state. So I'm essentially creating an integer called state that I can use in my code to control my different animations. It's just like any other integer variable that you've used in code before, so like a scoring variable or something like that. Now I need to apply this state condition to my transitions. So the transitions need to know what they're supposed to do based on this state variable that I'm going to be controlling in my code. So what I'm going to do is pick the transition that's moving between idle and walk. And you'll notice I've got this little list of conditions down here. It says list is empty. I'll click the plus button and I can select state. And I'm going to go down to the box that says greater, and I'm going to swap it over to equals. And I'm going to say equals 1. So what that means is when the state is 1, we go from idle to walk. The other thing I'm going to do is uncheck this box that says has exit time, because that just causes a little bit of wonkiness with our animations and might have a little bit of lag between them. And so we don't want that to happen. I'm going to go ahead and turn that off. I'm going to do the same thing between walk and idle. So I'm going to add another condition here on the walk and idle transition. Set it to equals. And this time I'm going to set it to 0. What I'm going to basically be setting up here is 0 is my idle state. So when state is 0, I should be showing the idle animation. If state is 1, I should be showing the walking animation. And then, as you can probably expect, I'm going to set it up so that when state's 2, we get the running animation. So I'm going to turn off my exit time again. And I'm just going to basically repeat this process for all the other transitions. So on the walk to run transition, I'm going to add a state equals 2 and turn off the exit time. So when its state is 2, I should be moving from walk to run. I'm going to go here. We got another condition, state equals 1. So that will get us into our walking animation. And finally, on these last couple transitions, idle to run is again going to be state equals 2, because 2 is our running state, essentially. And here, when we go from run to idle, that should be state equals 0. So I'm going to turn off our exit time again. So now we should have our animations set up enough that we can start coding them, and that's what I'm going to show you in the next video. But we might want to do a little bit of quick testing first to make sure everything's working properly. So I'm going to drop into my game view. I'm going to click on the game tab and hit play. And I should be seeing my idle animation. Let's go ahead and test our sounds real quick. So the first sound you heard was when I held down the W key. The second sound you heard was when I held down the R key. And when I released them, it stopped playing the sounds. That came from our previous sound tutorial. And since our state is 0 right now, we're seeing the idle animation. One cool thing we can do is click on our animator tab and actually change the state inside of the animator tab. So if I change this over to 1 and then go back to my game view, cool, I see the walking animation. Let's go ahead and put it on 2. Set it to 2. We get our running animation. So now we can tell our animations are working, and when we change our states, we're moving between different animations. When we're in state 0, we get idle. When we're in state 1, we get a walk. When we're at state 2, we get a run. And what I'm going to do in the next video is show you how you can edit the cat controller script that we already have with the sound code content in there, and add in a little bit of code that will allow us to control those animations so that when we press W, we will be walking, and when we press R, we'll be running. So I hope this tutorial was useful to you, and I will catch you in part 2 of the tutorial a little bit later.